I guess the real Promised Neverland was the friends we made along the way. That, but unironically, that's my review.
Meet a boy named Phil and his family on vacation from the 22nd century. Got a rented time machine and they're on their way to a time way back in the day. So now he's Phil out to do it, keeping it together just as best as he can. Phil out the future, he's a 22nd century man.
Promised Neverland is a thriller manga. We'll call it a thriller. It at least starts as a thriller. That was written by Kaiju Shirai with art from Posca Demizu, and it was serialized on Weekly Shonen Jump from 2016 to a couple hours ago. This was a long time coming because the editors kind of were advertising that this manga being about to end for over a year. It was kind of weird, like every month it seemed they were saying, hey, the manga's at its climax, the manga's about to end, and it just never did, until now it of course finally did. I have a lot of history with this one, and I have a lot to say. So let's discuss. The story follows Emma, a joyful 11-year-old girl who lives with her family at the Gracefield orphanage. Now this is a pretty slammin' place to live, okay? They have a big happy family. They're taken care of by Isabella, who they call Mama. They have fun, they're well fed, they play games, they read books. They do have to take these like weird sci-fi looking tests, but you know, whatever. They're also not allowed to leave, and no one has ever seen the outside world. But they're okay with that because they know it's not forever. Because at Gracefield, you know, once someone turns 12, or, you know, at any time before that, they could always be adopted by a foster family. And much like many orphans, that's the good shit right there. That's what they're all striving for. And one day, one of the younger children named Connie is being sent away there. She's being adopted. And everyone's all sad, oh no, but you know, they're used to it. This has happened before. They've had to say goodbye to their family members. The problem is that Connie left her bunny, her stuffed animal that she loves so much. Emma, being such a kind-hearted soul, is like, oh shit, we gotta go bring this back to her, but before she realizes it's gone, because, you know, it would be awful if she didn't have her bunny. So her and her best friend Norman, who's the same age as her, they both run out to the gates of Gracefield, which they're told, you know, they're not supposed to go, but they're like, you know, fuck it, we gotta bring a stuffed toy back to a little girl. But oh shit, turns out that little girl has been murdered! And this is when they realize that their entire existence has been a lie, because Gracefield is not a happy orphanage. After a very close encounter where they almost got discovered by these crazy alien-like demon monsters, they realize that the Gracefield orphanage is really a farm, because they do not live in a world full of humans. They live in a world full of these demon monsters. And these monsters, well, they eat humans. Gracefield in particular is a very special farm though, because this is a farm that raises kids to be the cream of the crop, the tastiest of the tasty. And that's why they take these tests I mentioned. Because the tastiest part of the human turns out to be the brain, so the better developed brain they have, well, good shit, you're gonna be a meal fit for the king. Anyway, so Emma and Norman are like, well, what the fuck? They go home and then they immediately start scheming. They're like, we gotta get the fuck out of here or everyone we know is going to die. Including us, because we're almost 12, and once we're 12, you know that's it. That you're done for. You're out no matter what. Now, first they realize that they're going to need help, so the first thing they do is let Ray know, who's another one of their friends, the only other child the same age as them, and this is when their whole jailbreak plan begins. Are you thinking, hold on, how are these young kids gonna even try to pull this off? Well, Emma, Ray, and Norman are very special. The reason they are still in Gracefield is because they are the smartest kids there by a wide margin. They are pretty much geniuses. And that's why they haven't been shipped out yet, because their brains are still developing and they're trying to get, you know, the best juicy brain they can get. That will be to their detriment, because now they know the truth and they want to get the fuck out of here. Not going to be as easy as running away though, because while they were bringing little bunny back, they discovered the truth. In their panic when they left, well, they left the bunny behind, only to be found by Mama Isabella, who is of course working for the demons and is in on the whole thing. So now she suspects that someone will discover the truth, and here we go. From then on, we get an arc full of suspense, full of mind games, full of strategy and tactics, full of high stakes, full of mystery, as the children, you know, discover new things about this horrible world they live in. And man, is it good. Holy shit. The first arc in the Promised Neverland is unbelievable, man. Just from the first chapter, this has one of the best first chapter hooks I've ever read in a manga. So much so that I remember when this manga first came out 4 years ago. I've never seen a manga develop such a hardcore following so early on before. Right from the start, everyone's like, this is the shit right here. And people were religiously following it. I was religiously following it because this arc slaps, man. It's so tightly written, so tightly plotted, so perfectly paced. There's so many mysteries and so many challenges to overcome, and how these children are able to do it is so fantastic. There is a bit of a suspension of disbelief to all of this because, you know, sometimes they're a bit too smart to be like, alright, okay, you guys calm down. But overall, from start to finish, this arc is phenomenal. But it only makes up about a quarter of the story. And I'm not going to be spoiling the events of what happens after this arc. As per usual, I'll just be talking in a very vague sense, so you won't be spoiled if you haven't read it yet. But things take a bit of a shift after this arc. It used to be, you know, a very suspenseful tactical thriller, and then it slowly shifts over to more of a survival action series. Now, when this first happened, I was really worried because I'm like, okay, you're taking the things we love so much about this manga and you're kind of doing away with them, kind of replacing it with more of, you know, like something you would usually find in Shonen Jump. But I have to say, at first, they did a really, really good job with it. They don't just, you know, change up the genre because they can. I mean, there's a very clear reason why they do it. It works really well within the story. And from then on, the series feels different, but it's still really, really great. The stakes in this part of the story become much, much higher. The world building is, you know, taken to a new level. We learn a lot more interesting things about the world, and the survival dynamics change. You know, the things are still very suspenseful, but it's just different, and different in a really good way. And the added element of action to the series is pretty fantastic. There's a lot of really awesome and intense action scenes in this series, usually involving, you know, humans and these like monsters, these demons, which are such cool creatures because they're not invulnerable, but they're so much more than these humans. So what the humans have to do is they always have to use their smarts and their wits and their tactics to take them down. And that's where, you know, parts of the first arc bleed into the rest of the series, because they still can't accomplish things easily. They still have to work really, really hard and be super smart to get to where they are. And that's why even after this you know, big shift in genre, The Promised Neverland still stays so fresh and enjoyable. So all that makes up about 2/3 of the series. And after that, we move into the final arc. Now, you can like break this arc down to be a bunch of smaller arcs, but I don't really like to do it because it all kind of just feels like the one arc for me. So at this point, Promised Neverland was fucking incredible. Loads of people loved it. I loved it. I loved it so much. If you go back like a year ago, I was making videos talking about how much I loved it. I believe it was in my top 10 when I made my top 30 video last summer. That's how much I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it, and I was so excited to see where it was going to go. That's why it really, really pains me to talk about this final arc. Because aside from a really strong start, ever since it has just been a downward spiral into bleh. This is probably the most disappointing manga arc I have ever read, not only because it's such a step down in quality from what came before it, but because it devalues a lot of what came before it and makes a lot of the series worse in retrospect. But what happens? How do you take a fantastic series like this and just, you know, throw it out the window like that? Well, I think the main problem comes from Shirai making this series a lot more ambitious than it was originally planned to be, while at the same time sticking to the plan of keeping it really short. You know, at 20 volumes, not a huge manga, not enough time to tell this like massive globe-trotting story with all this politics and action and survival and a lot of supernatural elements that get added in. It just ends up being a bit of a like hot steamy mess. If you showed me like all of the plot points in this arc before I had read it, I would have been like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and you know what, that sounds pretty awesome, give it to me. But the problem is that they don't give it to you in a very good way. Everything about this arc feels very rushed, underdeveloped. Conflicts are introduced and then resolved super quickly, oftentimes to a comical level. The stakes should be as high as they've ever been, but they feel so much lower because at this point we've seen the characters like survive and get through so much that things just start to feel a bit redundant, like you're going through the motions. Is it to say this arc is bad and terrible? Not really. There are still a lot of good moments. Like I said, like the plot points, I don't really have a problem with those. It's it's how they were executed. But, you know, some of the moments here are still really great, and they harken back to the good old days, you know, like a year and a half ago when the series was still really awesome. But every time a moment like that happens, it's usually just undercut by, you know, something stupid or something being, like, resolved incredibly quickly. And then you get to the very ending. Oh my god. It was not good, folks. Plot points that they had been building and building and building up for forever, for like over a year, end up either being super insignificant or falling super flat on their face. They try to have a bunch of redemption arcs that don't work. They have like last minute, very high stakes conflicts that again are just like brushed away so quickly. And the very ending felt extremely unsatisfying. Which is weird because it's one of those endings where this could have been really good and really fitting, but you just didn't spend enough time on it at all. It felt so rushed, and I felt so disappointed. If this series had been longer, like maybe 25 volumes, but not just adding more things at the end, like actually going back and like developing more of the plot points they were doing, I think this series really could have stayed consistently good throughout. But like I mentioned before, I think it was just a problem where the ambition just got way too big and they couldn't properly tell it in the time that they had. I don't know why they couldn't have just extended it. I mean, it's one of the best-selling manga in the world right now. But I guess Shirai and Demizu just, they were done with it. They were like, yeah, we had a good run. We made some good change. But yeah, it all really didn't work out in the end. And I hate to say it again because this was one of my favorite series, but that's how it goes sometimes. Anyway, let's talk about the characters. So our main trio, Emma, Ray, and Norman, are all very interesting because they're all like super different from each other, but they have very high IQs. Like I mentioned, they're all geniuses, but the way they go about it is completely different. Emma is the joyful, happy one, even through all this awful shit going down. She still manages to stay cheerful and enthusiastic. But her main character flaw is her naivete. They set it up from the very beginning of the story, and oh man, they aren't going to let you forget it. Emma is naive to a comical fault. The very first instances of this is when they're originally planning to escape Gracefield, and Emma's like, we gotta take everyone with us, including, you know, the babies, the toddlers, and Ray and Norman are like, well, the fuck, we can't take all the babies with us. You're stupid. But the reason Emma's naivete did not get in the way of the story is because she often had to learn to make compromises. The world is not just sunshine and rainbows. You can't always get what you want, and Emma has to learn it the hard way and learn to deal with it. And when we have moments like that, it's all fantastic. Emma was a really likable character. But the problem is that in the final arc, when everything is super rushed and they don't develop any of the conflicts, it really feels like the world now is sunshine and rainbows, and Emma can get everything she wants because fuck it. That's probably the main reason why everything in the final arc feels so rushed, because every time Emma's like, hey, we let's do this, and people are like, no, you're stupid. But then she like does it anyway. It really clashes with what the series had set up beforehand. And because of this, it really doesn't feel like Emma develops much at all as a character, which is really sad to see because I did really enjoy her at first, but she eventually just kind of became annoying. And then you have Ray, who's more of, you know, like the quiet, cynical, I don't give a fuck type of guy. And he's really awesome at first. In fact, I would say, you know, in the first arc of the story, he's my favorite character. He's so smart and all of his plans are just ingenious. Like some of the things this guy comes up with, some of the things you learn about him. Beautiful. But he goes from being one of the most important characters to kind of being a nothing character. When I was reading through the final arc, and he like said something, I would be like, oh my god, Ray said something. I completely forgot he was even here. And that sucks to see because he was such a great character. And he starts to, you know, just go along with things that it didn't really seem like the old Ray would be okay with. You could chalk that up to him developing, but I don't really think it was a logical development for Ray to have. Then you have Norman, who for most of the series is a Chad. A super Chad. Oh my god, this guy is... His whole character is filled with spoilers, so I don't really want to go into it much. But I will say he was an excellent character until he wasn't. Now as for the rest of the cast, you have a ton, and I mean a ton, of side characters, some of which, like Dawn, Gilda, Jillian, they all get quite a amount of time spent on them. They're all pretty well developed for what they are, and they're all pretty enjoyable. But the problem Neverland has is that I think it introduces way too many characters for this shorter series. So oftentimes they'll introduce a ton of cool new characters, but we don't really get enough time to spend with them to really care about them. Sometimes we do learn a lot about these characters, but then they don't end up doing much. And a lot of times they're just like, hey, you remember this kid? We're gonna do stuff with him now. And you're like, who is this guy? I don't even, what? But then of course you have the God Emperor of Dune himself, Philip. I talk about Phil a lot, and honestly, it's mostly just shitposting. I don't actually think Phil is the best character of all time, but he is without a doubt a mega giga Chad. He barely plays a role in this series at all, but the small role he does play comes as a really big surprise and is really fantastic, and it was one of the things I loved about this series from the start. Sadly though, it only happens once and then he's just whatever. I know, I shouldn't be hard on Phil. He's 4 years old. I'm still waiting for him to get into Jump Force, by the way. I haven't given up on that hope. Then you have a bunch of villains, which range from being fantastic to, well, kind of shit. And as you would expect, at the start of the series they're fantastic, and then they get worse and worse and worse until I don't even know what the fuck was going on for the villains in the end. Isabella is the only one I'll mention, due to the spoilers, but she was a really fantastic villain, very, very cunning, very, very evil. She would stop at nothing to stop these children who she suspected were trying to escape. The lengths she goes to are often really shocking and just add so much greatness to the series. Along with another villain who's introduced later who was so interesting and fantastic. Didn't take shit from anyone. But then in the final arc, again with just everything being rushed, it includes these villains who just show up and we're like, who are you? You haven't done anything in the series so far. We're just supposed to hear your name and shudder, but that doesn't really work because the last villains, they were all intimidating and we saw what they were capable of, but these guys are just like, ooga booga, we're evil, and then that's it, because we spend barely any time with them. But then the worst thing it does is that it goes back to the original villains and makes them so much worse. They're like, hey, remember these guys? Remember how awesome they were? Well, they're lame now. Have fun. Man. So yeah, characters started off kind of fantastic. Absolutely loved them. But then most of them kind of fell flat near the end. Real shame to see. Shirai, what'd you do, man? Oh. Anyway, enough of that shit. The art is fantastic. I'm a bit biased because I absolutely adore Posca Demizu's art. She is one of my favorite artists, period. And if you don't understand it from this series, go follow her on Twitter, check out her art book. Her stuff is amazing. I absolutely love her style, and it's no different in The Promised Neverland. Obviously, being a weekly series, it's not going to look as good as her concept stuff. And I think there are a few flaws with the art here or there. For one, I think some of the characters, sometimes they can look a bit different in different panels. The designs don't always seem to be super consistent. I found that all throughout the series, even as the art got significantly better over time. I still noticed a few moments where characters looked a bit weird, but she really shines in her design of this world. The demons look fantastic. They're so freaky and intimidating. Her art complements action so well. It really helps the transition from, more of a thriller to an action series. And her art really carries a lot of this final arc, because even when, the story wasn't up to snuff, you could always count on there being some amazing pages, and there always were. So yeah, I have very few complaints about the art of this series. I absolutely love it, and I would love to see Demizu come back. I don't know if she's planning on teaming up with Shirai again, if she's going to go off and do her own thing, but either way, I'm here for it. Those were my thoughts on The Promised Neverland. A year ago, if you had told me that Demon Slayer would have a better ending than Promised Neverland, I would have called you insane. I would have roundhouse kicked you out of my window. But this past year has just been super rough for the story. It really, really, really went downhill. And I hate to say it. And if you did enjoy the ending of this series, I'm happy for you. I could not do it, but God, I wish I could. And it's hard to think of how I would recommend this series. Because, well, I think especially the first arc is absolutely worth reading. You're not going to want to stop. You won't get any conclusiveness until you finish the story. And by then I think you'll just be disappointed. So I would say yes, read this series. About 2/3 of it is really, really good. but read at your own discretion. And my final score is a 7 out of 10. A very conflicting one, because at its height it can reach a 10, and at its worst it can be like a 3 or a 4. But yeah, we're gonna settle there, and there you go.
I forget to say something in every review. It's starting to become a bit of a problem. Anyway, if you're interested in picking up The Promised Neverland, the first 15 volumes are in print and available from Viz Media, with the rest, of course, coming shortly. It's also the perfect length for a box set, so I wouldn't be surprised if that happened eventually. And of course, all 181 chapters are available on the Shonen Jump app and website. Pay $2 a month and then you can read all of them. Then you have the first season of the anime, which covered the first fantastic arc of the series. I think it did a really great job. And you have Season 2 coming out in January. Now, Season 2 is still going to be adapting the good shit, so I am pretty excited for it, and there you go.
For some alternate recommendations, if you like Promised Neverland, I'd point you to Attack on Titan. I know most of you have probably already read it, but it's, a survival action series that I think handles its story a lot better than Neverland because it lets things breathe. It doesn't rush through shit. Like, imagine if Attack on Titan, the full story, was the same, but instead it was like 20 volumes. That's how The Promised Neverland feels. And there you go. Thank you all so much for watching. You can leave your thoughts on The Promised Neverland in the comments below. And I'll see you all soon for another review that's going to be a bit different. So you can look forward to that. And,
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on that farm he had a pig, E-I-E-I-O. With an oink oink here and an oink oink there. Here an oink, there an oink, everywhere an oink oink. Old MacDonald had a farm.